Welcome to Accelerate OC, the only show focused on the people leading innovation in Orange County. Join our host, Kerry Ransom, in his conversations with the trendsetters, entrepreneurs, investors, and leaders here, because it's time to Accelerate OC.
Good morning. Welcome to Accelerate OC. I'm Kerry Ransom. And thanks always to our engineer, Paul, for making me and my guests sound so good. We are really starting to get acclimated and used to this virtual studio environment. And I am excited that we continue to be able to share great stories here in Southern California. And I'm really excited to welcome Dean Kline here today. Before I do, let me tell you a little bit about Dean. And I think we're going to have a great conversation over the next little while. So Dean is currently the co-founder and senior managing director of a newer group launched at USC called ROSSIER EDVENTURE, and it's an education ecosystem, including doing some early investment in startups in the EdTech world. So we'll talk a fair bit about that today. He's also the co-founder and managing director of Penn Venture Partners, which is a VC fund primarily looking at early stage tech companies in sectors like business services, also EdTech, life sciences, media, specialty manufacturing, and workplace learning. He's been a venture investor for over 20 years and has had a number of really successful outcomes like IPOs and many other public company acquisitions among his many investments. Prior to that, he was an executive of an organization that was setting up children's hospitals in developing countries. He also was the assistant to executive director at the World Bank, which was focusing on project quality, education, and health sector policy in Africa and Asia. And he began his career at the US Treasury Department as an international economist. So he's really spanned business and international NGOs. He's worked in the US government. And so I think he really has a unique perspective, particularly as we think about education and the number of different constituents that fit in there. And so he's been a lecturer at several colleges. He's written extensively, has also set up a number of entities that have worked to promote innovation and entrepreneurship. And I had the pleasure of meeting Dean last year, shortly after he relocated here from the East Coast. And he's been spending a fair bit of time, even though he's LA based, spending a fair bit of time in Orange County. And I know he's found some interesting education technology or what's also known as EdTech startups down here. So we wanted to talk about some of that today. Dean, it's really great to have you on Accelerate OC this morning.
Hey, thank you, Kerry.
Yes. So let's get to the starting line and let's talk about, somewhat the pressing news of the day. Clearly, like almost every area of life, the education system has been disrupted in a big way because of COVID-19. My wife is a kindergarten teacher. I have 3 kids at home that are doing online learning in different variations right now. What are you hearing from your colleagues out there? As I explained, you touch many different facets that all have a stake in education. How are they thinking about the future of education given the environment we're in right now?
Yeah, so I think, we've had the ability to do virtual education and training. I mean, that's been around a long time, but it's mostly, I think, been limited to higher ed and tutoring and learning gamification, skills training. So in those areas, I think we've seen a steady improvement in quality and breadth. However, as it's now become clear, in general, the same sort of attention hasn't been paid to utilizing sort of virtual capabilities to improve learning access and outcomes across K through 12 and the workforce. So, there's a significant gap in access to devices and connectivity, in particular for lower income households. And so I think by definition, that hasn't been a priority. So I'm concerned that this will already worsen the socioeconomic problem that we that we have, particularly in education. I think we pretty well understand the building blocks of learning, and that comes first. But I think technology can be an enabler for teachers and for students to improve outcomes. I mean, I think, going forward, we all need the ability to understand technology and to thoughtfully utilize it.
Mm-hmm. So it's interesting. So you think right now the disruption is going to worsen the divide?
Yeah, no,
I guess my sense is, one of the great benefits of technology is the scalability, and in some cases, the ability to dramatically reduce costs. So do you see a path over time where access actually is greatly improved? Because
I do.
I mean, you think of, as I think about things like, obviously there are pockets where we have big homeless populations, and that this stands to potentially worsen some of that. But I think that the sort of single most ubiquitous device now is a mobile phone,
yes.
And very likely a smartphone. So that in that respect, it seems like connectivity is getting better or easier, that could improve access.
No, I agree in that respect, Kerry. I think it is sort of a great enabler and can be an equalizer. And most of us have smartphones at this point, but we still don't have, I think, the situation where a lot of lower income kids, parents, whatever, have access to those kind of devices and and the connectivity that's needed to take advantage of it. And I think the good thing is I don't think that's particularly difficult to do. And so now we're sort of being forced to do that, or in some cases prodded. But I don't necessarily see it being depending on the, let's take K through 12, depending on the school, I don't necessarily think it's essential as a equalizer sort of in the classroom, because it's hard enough for a teacher just to control a classroom.
Sure.
But certainly with respect to supplemental learning and education, you can go home and do it in the quiet, hopefully, if you have a quiet spot, place there. But again, you got to have access to devices. If it's one phone in a family or whatever, or a couple, and there are 5 of you, that's that gets tough. And then the issue is too, are the teachers trained to do it, and do we have the sort of content that we can thoughtfully utilize.
Well, definitely more to talk about there. So have you seen, given this environment, I think there's sort of 2 competing worlds out here. We've got companies that are in existence that are in some cases radically pivoting to try to survive. And then there's another school that says, hey, there are new opportunities on the horizon like never before. So I'm going to focus on this second one. Are you seeing any new companies sort of birthed in just the last couple months in response to this, that are saying, we see a new opportunity, we believe in a new normal, new reality on the other side, we want to be early to market?
Yeah, I don't kind of within the last couple months, no. What I think we have been seeing, though, are a growing number of EdTech entrepreneurs that have more experience in the education system, as opposed to entrepreneurs who are more technologists than educators. So I think that's positive, and this sort of can help them with respect to whatever they're considering or have have probably started with respect to an early stage company. It kind of helps them to think that through. So yeah, we've been working with a lot of our cohort companies on that, but but frankly, most of them have been doing it because that's a focus of ours. And we have a program itself which is almost entirely virtual. So I just see it kind of as accelerating the situation.
So at any changes you're seeing, I mean, you're obviously involved at USC, you said a lot of the program is virtual, but I know you spend a fair bit of time on the campus as well. Any changes you're seeing at USC that could be a proxy or an indicator for other universities around the country?
No, it's interesting there. The graduate level programs have been largely conducted, or at least some portion of them, online. That's been encouraged for a long time, and maybe it's the School of Education's, I don't know, been doing it for like 20 years. And the School of the School of Engineering's been doing it for that long. The School of Education also for quite some time. On the undergraduate level, that's not been encouraged. That's another conversation, which I suppose makes sense for that school. But they made a pretty quick pivot with respect to that. But we have sort of USC as our affiliation, and it's our starting point. But it's not. We hope to. We focus on Southern California as a whole, and frankly too, we have 18 cohort companies this year, and it covers something like 5 continents. So it's really the only way to operate. And I should say that EdVentures comes in part as a response to something we've been experiencing over the last couple decades. So that's kind of how long this has been going on in my view. And it's a response to what we saw as something that was kind of increasingly anachronistic. So for instance, you have programs that continue to require acceleration incubator programs that continue to require education entrepreneurs to sit in what's basically a classroom for several days to learn, and they've been largely using a curriculum that is not much different than if you were a business accelerator for, say, material science or agribusiness. At the same time, though, we're seeing learning becoming more blended, if you will, and also sort of more personalized. So that kind of situation is just not consistent. So as I mentioned, what we decided to do from the beginning was to go almost entirely virtual. And the only thing that we do live are 2 pitch events, one at USC Demo Day, which is put on by the students, kind of a big event. And the other, there's a gathering of education entrepreneurs, investors, practitioners that happens to take place in San Diego every sort of early April. And we do a live pitch event there. And so that was to be 2 weeks ago. And so we just merely turned that into a virtual pitch event. And it's interesting because it's difficult to get all those folks into one place unless you have a large gathering, physical gathering, like I mentioned. But it's a heck of a lot easier when you're doing it virtually.
Yes.
And so then they don't have the hassle of traveling. And
how did it go?
Yeah, I thought it went really well. I think the only especially with respect to the folks sort of we had in the audience, we're very pleased with that. our the founders in our program are already used to, you know, doing things online, and typically when we have workshops every week and we have a guest, we have them do a little pitch anyway. So it wasn't a significant difference for them. I think what we have to figure out is, particularly when you have, say, 13 companies pitching, and you want to do it in a reasonable period of time, keep people's attention, that requires it to be pretty rapid fire.
Yes.
And I'd say that's something we kind of have to figure out. You know, particularly when you have Q&A and feedback. It's funny. People are still more used to asking questions and providing feedback, I think, when it's live. And when it's online, you see all these, different boxes of folks and all that. People are a bit more reticent. But I think once we become more comfortable with that, I was pretty pleased with it.
That's great. Well, that sort of leads into my next question. So obviously a pitch event typically is about validation, awareness, and ultimately investment. So how are you thinking about investment in this environment from your venture fund and the cohort of companies, as you mentioned, and did you get much of a sense from the investors that were part of that recent pitch event to give you an indication of how you feel like the world is feeling right now?
Yeah, so I'm kind of a recovering VC myself, and we did get some feedback from them, and my guess is most of them, at the core, if you're a venture investor, you regard a situation like this as an opportunity, as odd as it is to think about that. But at the same time, though, given this situation, you have to, as an investor, I think, sort of look at your portfolio, existing and companies you think you might bring on, and sort of recalibrate that, with respect to, what their prognosis is, and where you see their revenue headed, what's happening to their audience and so on. But it also gives you, I think, as an investor, a nice look into how robust these products and services are in an environment like this, which is unique, sort of as a pandemic. But I see this kind of environment once this is over, this is much of this is a future anyway for I think for learning. However, though, if a fund has not sort of banked much of the commitments they get from their limited partners, my guess is those limited partners, because they're dealing with a situation of uncertainty, they will probably put some pressure on the venture investors to slow things down. Whereas the others, if you bank those commitments, then as long as your LPs aren't asking you to slow down, then you can probably be even more active than you
otherwise might. Yeah,
than you supposed, right?
Yeah. Well, let's go a little bit deeper. I know I mentioned we really met as you've been spending more time down here looking at EdTech ventures here in Orange County, where we have crossed paths a couple times. As you think about, you talked to, around some different elements of education given the environment we're in. Do you have kind of a general framework that you use as you think about education across the spectrum from, you mentioned K through 12, we've got higher ed, we've got workplace learning. Do you have a sort of a core framework that you use as you think about looking at opportunities or this cohort of companies or investment?
Yeah, so we operate a bit differently. So our thesis, as I said, we've been doing thinking about for a couple decades with respect to education. So I mean, I'm mainly concerned, and so are my colleagues, about equitable access to quality education, and not so much a return on investment. But working out of venture capital, that alignment's just it's not there. In my view, it's a large part of the reason that technology's not had a profound and kind of virtuous impact on equitable access.
Not just in education, in other areas as well.
Yeah, but particularly I think in sort of, we'll call it like a public good, like education. And so, you know, as you've probably seen a lot of the data, you know, the founders of companies addressing these issues have been a pretty homogeneous group. and I've come to the view that they cannot truly understand the problems. So as such, we think we need to encourage entrepreneurs who make up most of the practitioners and students who who kind of suffer from these inequities, and I think have the most to gain by addressing them. So that means women and people of color. But they receive such a dismal portion of venture capital funding frankly from people who look, you know, like me. So we have to engage those sort of EdTech founders who are women and people of color, and expose them to the same advantages that other entrepreneurs have. And actually, it's 98% of the 18 companies we have in this cohort has such founders.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it's kind of funny to think of, but we have 2 companies that have solely have Anglo founders. One of them's in Estonia, the other's in Cape Town.
That's
so, yeah.
That's very, very, very cool. So, I mean, is it unique in your mind? Is that unique to education, where you feel like they can just empathize with some of these customer segments that you're trying to address in a more real and meaningful way? I mean, one of the things I thought you mentioned earlier that I thought was interesting is you said you're seeing more EdTech companies that have people with extensive experience in education. Is that by your design, where you're helping marry those together, or what is it that you think is driving that? And part of the reason I ask that is because, you know, I'm sitting in our venture studio today, and a core part of that thesis is about bringing the right kind of expertise to a company in the earliest stages. And that could be in a co-founder sort of scenario, or it could be in just a key hands-on type of person. And we've got, you know, we brought a tremendous amount of expertise into our studio, not to be advisors per se, but to really dig in, because we're a believer that you solve the biggest problems with the best teams. And I'm sure as you think about education, you probably think about it that way, but I'm just curious how you're seeing, you know, what you perceive to be more capable teams coming together.
Yeah, you know, it's I'm glad you mentioned that. You know, we have our limitations, right? So we have to sort of bring folks in virtual workshops and that, and then have the entrepreneurs follow up. But you know, what you provide is essential, particularly for entrepreneurs like that, because they just don't they don't typically have access to that sort of those sorts of resources and people. So it's crucial to get them together. And I think that's one thing that's, from what I can tell in Orange County, you have a group of folks like you and others who are very committed to that. And it's, you know, highly important if you're going to build that ecosystem. But yeah, I think you do want to marry those folks. And you know, from our perspective, we encourage entrepreneurs like that and look for entrepreneurs like that who have that sort of more experience in sort of the pedagogy than they do in the technology. So at the same time, so we're looking for them. At the same time, for whatever reason, I think they're more of the kind of group of entrepreneurs that are out there and willing to roll up their sleeves and do this. And it could very well be because it just hasn't happened to any. We haven't solved a lot of these problems with respect to using technology to scale in education. For those I think who need it the most.
Well, one of the things I love that you mentioned was this idea of really trying to create opportunity and advantage for these entrepreneurs. That's been a big part of a lot of the conversations I've had on this show, has been how do we think differently about entrepreneurs, particularly as we think about the need to create more jobs for a broader group of people that are good jobs. And I think it's been easy for us to hear in Orange County, and I think even in Southern California, to gloss over things with, oh, we have a low unemployment rate and other data that can support a point of view. But the reality is we have not been producing the kinds of jobs that allow people to thrive here, that are forward, innovative, the kinds of multiplier jobs that are happening in other markets around the world in a really meaningful way. And so one of the things that I've talked a lot about is this idea of unfair advantage. And so one of the ways we're trying to manifest that here is by bringing world-class talent together who we can align with an entrepreneur who's trying to solve a real critical problem. And I'll give you one example is a founder that we're pretty far down the path with right now, who self-taught. He grew up in a place where he didn't have access. Yeah. He self-taught from YouTube and a bunch of other places and became a robotics engineer. Wow. And now his mission is to really try and take that into a platform that he can provide to others. And we talk about the idea of taking an auto mechanic, supplementing those core skills with advanced manufacturing or other skill-based training to really increase the opportunity that person might have. Yeah. And so I think, unfair advantage there is getting them access to the talent to help them build their business better, faster, getting them access to customers. Obviously, capital is a piece of that. But as you think about the EdTech space, how have you been really using your platform to, getting 98% of your cohort from, a diverse group like you have is amazing. But are there other things that you're really thinking about, or that you feel like the community could help with to create more of that unfair advantage? I just don't know that we celebrate entrepreneurs and support them in the way that we need to.
Yeah, wow. So, like, for instance, I've been spending more and more time in Orange County, and one of the reasons is that, so we've had 2 cohorts, and in those 2 cohorts, we've had I think like 5, 6 companies that are headquartered in Orange County, and yeah, I think 6 and 4 of those are led by women. So that in itself is interesting. I can't tell if that's a one-time sort of thing, and we've found pretty much all the EdTech entrepreneurs that are out there, but I don't believe that's the case.
Well, hopefully these conversations spur more of it. I think we have a new surge coming for sure.
I do too, and I think it's sort of a virtuous cycle. So the thing to do is, as I said, we do what we can, and we run this, we run it like a startup ourselves. So it's pretty lean. But the idea then would be to get those folks into situations like you have, to kind of pick things up from there on. And if you can do that in kind of their home base, then I think that's incredibly valuable. I mean, we can, you can do it virtually, but at a certain point, again, I think this kind of personal interactions with folks that you have sort of in your stable are key, and then that encourages others to do the same. And because it's very lonely.
Absolutely.
And it's become even more so, in a situation like this. So no, I think what's happening in Orange County is very encouraging, and it's much less fragmented than you'd see in Los Angeles County, which is just, as you know, so so big in many ways, and particularly when it comes to K through 12, it's tough to get your arms around it.
Sure. Yeah, that is for sure, and certainly some great things happening on the education side through groups like CEO Leadership Alliance and things I know you're also involved with. So one thing I'm curious, we sort of touched around it. I mentioned it with one of the companies that we're involved with, but this idea of, I'll call it skill-based learning versus critical thinking or more liberal arts type of education. And it's almost religious, I think, in some respects, how people tend to think about this. And I probably have a little bit of hybrid of both as I think about my own life. And as you're thinking about philosophically things like access, how are you thinking about sort of that, hey, let's equip people with the skills, because there's a lot of evidence saying we're not creating the right kinds of skilled workers for the needs of the world, and that in some cases critical thinking skills aren't going to lead to direct skills. So I'm just curious how you think about those two areas.
Yeah, so I come from a decidedly liberal arts background, so I realize the advantages of that and also the shortcomings when it comes to innovation. So it won't surprise you to learn that kind of like you, I think we need both. So if a person doesn't have that background, so let's say if you're more of a liberal arts background and you don't have kind of a skills-based learning background, well then what we look to do is partner them with someone who's been trained in the skills-based side, and or you can do your best to help that entrepreneur get that understanding. But the way we approach it is we try to incorporate engineering thinking into EdVenture. So one of my two colleagues is actually dual faculty at the School of Engineering and the School of Education, which in and of itself, I don't know of any place else that exists. And is he's a Carnegie Mellon grad, and so I've learned so much from him, and so the entrepreneurs. But I think you have to be very, very intentional about balancing that out.
So to take that a step further, you talked about how you found a number of really compelling early entrepreneurs down here in Orange County. Do you see Orange County as uniquely equipped to be an innovator on an ongoing basis in areas of education? And if so, like what is it about Orange County that you think really makes us a potential for that?
Yeah, I think you have a really nice balance there of that sort of skills-based learning and of a more traditional education. And there are, at least with respect to STEM, I've just been impressed by how many really thoughtful approaches there have been to doing this. So the one that I know the best is the TGR Foundation, and I just think the STEM program that they have for kids who come there, and for teachers who are taught, they sort of have this teach the teacher philosophy, and even with respect to how the kind of structure is organized, is to me just so path breaking, and you kind of just want to take stuff like that and make sure everyone has access to it. And there are others of that type in Orange County that I don't see that you need to go outside of the county to get those people who are able to do that. It's a matter of scaling it and kind of implementing it. And that's at the K through 12 level. So I think you have, again, to the extent you can create equitable access to things like that, I think you have the building blocks. Now, when it comes to workforce retraining and things of that nature, that's a little different. But then, higher education, you have some terrific schools there, from research universities to schools that are kind of very much liberal arts oriented, but also kind of heavy on entrepreneurship and more focus on engineering and things like that. So then it's a matter of keeping those folks there, and as you mentioned, creating the sort of jobs that would enable them to stay there, as opposed to going someplace like Silicon Valley,
Sure.
Which is becoming just increasingly out of reach for a lot of folks, just with the cost of living. And you can't surf there, Gary.
That's right.
Or it's pretty darn cold.
Yes. So to that, what is it about Southern California that you really appreciate? I mean, as I mentioned, you're relatively new here from planting yourself. What is it that drew you and really you appreciate about it?
Yeah, it's interesting. I actually, a good part of my family came here in the early 1920s. So I've always had a connection, and have been coming here on and off for a good period of time, just because I had portfolio companies here. So, but one, of course, the climate is very difficult to.
We got a nice one brewing today, for sure.
Yeah, what do you know? Although it has been, it's been unusually sort of gloomy lately, but now I can look out and see it. But also too, I think there's more of an attitude of innovation. You just see it with respect to, let's just take USC and like UCI or whatever, as opposed to many of the kind of older even universities in the Northeast, which I've operated in, and it's just this attitude of allowing you to innovate and encouraging it, that I think is very difficult to kind of recreate, because you already have, if you don't have that already, you have just this long history of a culture that really does not encourage that, and it's tough to turn that around, I think. But you have it.
So personally, Dean, how do you keep yourself sharp and kind of innovate yourself? Because I think it sort of starts with ourselves, right? I mean, to see an environment where we don't get to drive the level of change. I'm sure that was part of what drew you out of here. So how are you keeping yourself on the front edge of what's happening?
Yeah, in this case, I mean, I used to look at things more from a macro perspective, whether it's in Washington or as a venture investor. Although then I did have kind of forays into healthcare and that and education. But now I try and look at things kind of a bit more narrowly with respect to kind of a focus on education. So within that, I think it's very important to continue to utilize resources that are diverse with respect to the type of media you're looking at, and then with respect to kind of the diversity of opinion and what you're reading or what you're seeing, and who you're meeting. And the nice thing too about Southern California is I think with respect to who you're meeting, should you decide to do that, I mean those folks are here, and it's kind of a great joy actually to be able to meet up with people like that. And many of them are in Orange County, as you know. Yeah.
Well, final lap here at Accelerate OC, and one of the things I always ask my guests is to share a key piece of advice or lesson that they've learned along the way. So as you think about a lot of entrepreneurs that are in my audience, they're thinking about this current environment that we're in, a lot of uncertainty on what's ahead. What advice would you have for them?
Well, yeah, I think now more than ever, you cannot count on outside capital to fund your company. So I think you have to be aggressively innovative in how you line up revenue and survive, to continue to thrive or to grow. I would highly encourage entrepreneurs to do that.
Okay. I think that's a great piece of advice. Dean, thank you so much for joining me today and for sharing your perspective and thoughts. I think this mission that you're on the education technology world and helping enable many others to solve big problems that continue to exist and will even continue to present themselves is such a worthy cause, and I think is sort of that penultimate do good, do well opportunity, as I know we've talked about. And thanks for helping to get more startups off the ground here in Southern California. I think that's important to how we continue to shift the culture here to one that is embracing innovation opportunities. You're doing your part to accelerate OC from my perspective. So welcome to the family.
Thank you, Kerry. I appreciate it, and it's a pure pleasure from my perspective. So it's wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You've just listened to Accelerate OC. Join our live recordings every Tuesday morning at accelerateoc.com or listen, like, and share anytime from your favorite podcast spot. Let's accelerate OC together.
Okay, there we have it. Let me see.
Yeah,